Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Welcome back to Cultivate. I'm your host, Ty Fischer, the head of school here at Veritas Academy. And I've been accused of saying that I always have a treat for you today. And these conversations that we've had over the last few years have really been treats for me. This one, as we were talking, our podcast team, we didn't really theme the season, but a theme has come out of the conversations that we had. We're blessed to have Luminitsa Nichols talking about her experience during the Velvet Revolution in Romania, and Doug Wilson talking about standing up during controversy, and David Goodwin talking about the battle for the American mind. So today I have Dr. Weiling He, and I hope I said that right.
That's good.
That's good. Okay, you're very gracious. Weiling is, this last year, she has been a mom at Veritas. What many people, even some people on staff here, didn't know is that she was actually on sabbatical from her normal gig, which is a professor of architecture at Texas A&M in College Station. So she and I think Ethan was in third grade this last year. Second grade, okay. Well, he's tall. He's tall.
I know. He looks like a fourth grade.
Yes, he does. He does. So they'll be headed back to College Station. You might have noticed her. I began to notice her because she would walk to school in the morning and in the afternoon. And I'm like, how far are you walking? And she said, it's about 30 minutes or something like that. So she is not only on sabbatical, she was taking full advantage of that sabbatical by being healthy. So we welcome you here, and we're a little sad that you're going to be leaving. So tell us a little bit about what you do at Texas A&M.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fischer. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to parents or even a broader audience for Veritas. So thank you very much. I grew up in China. I was born at the later end of the Cultural Revolution, which we'll talk about today. But I consider myself very lucky because I had experienced when China wasn't rich, when the resources were very limited. And thinking back, I really appreciate that experience because I could appreciate a lot more what we have here. So very luckily, my life wasn't impacted by the Cultural Revolution much, but I could tell some details that's like a reminiscence of it.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to dig into today. We're going to talk about really, and it's not Weiling's history as much as it is her family history and even some missing parts of her family history because of the Cultural Revolution.
Right.
So she and her husband, Brian, and I were having lunch. Sarah Iacoviello was there as well. And she went through this story, and it was so amazing that I said, add this to the season. And thankfully, we've caught you before you headed back down to Texas. You know, it's really hot in Texas. It's nicer here in Lancaster County.
I know. I try to convince Brian to stay.
Okay. So for those people who might not know, what was the Cultural Revolution in China?
So it was a whole country turning mad for 10 years between 1966 and 1976. But I would consider the event, the prelude of the event, came on much earlier.
Okay.
So right after the New China was established in 1949.
1949,
yeah. There were a sequence of events, political or social, trying to establish this new country or develop this new country to certain ideology, to this ideal kind of commonwealth of people. But many things happened. There's a sequence of events I couldn't really, because I'm not a historian.
Okay.
I couldn't really talk about it, pinpoint to the dates. But there were, for example, eliminating private wealth everything belongs to the collective.
Which would have been a huge change for a mainly agricultural economy.
Yes.
In the late 40s and 50s and 60s. That's a huge change to collectivize everything.
Yes. And also, I think people were, in a certain period of time, people were putting in certain communes to work as, they call it in Chinese, a 公社. I would translate it into a community of production.
Okay.
Right? So people would go there and live there as a big group to try to produce for the new country, which is what they thought would be the future for the country, because everyone would appear to be equal, the wealth would be distributed equally among them, and that's their ideal. So everything started very positively, because after the wars with the Japanese, the civil war between the Communist Party and the Kuomintang, and finally people found this moment of having their own country, and they look forward to this future.
So there was a lot of patriotism and pride.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely. And there's this kind of a sense of separating from the old history in order to start the new. Everything was so proudly taken by the people.
Okay.
So that period was so glorified. I mean, even now, when my parents talk about it, they were like, "Oh, that was."
They look back on that nostalgically, right?
Right. Very, very positively. But something happened in the 1950s. I think it was some kind of the leader, right, trying to industrialize China.
Was that still Mao?
Yes,
Okay.
it was. And the country, in order to compete with the Western world, because there's always this kind of opposition between the two areas, so they try to catch up the modernization of the country. There was this event of exploring new areas for farming, which they went to geographically not suited for farming, so it led to kind of unsuccessful results. And there was this event of creating a lot of steel, because steel is the base material for industrialization. But then instead of doing it in a kind of scientifically sound way, the people would destroy their products made out of steel in order to make the new steel. But that would not make steel, that would destroy the steel as a material. So a lot of mistakes or ignorance was accompanied with this whole kind of new hope kind of event.
Yeah.
So which led to the big famine.
Okay.
So the economy went down. People didn't have enough to eat. Not only that, because there were some kind of pressure from the top government. Oh, you have to produce this much of the farm produce. You have to produce this much of the steel. So which made the lower level of the leaderships to lie to the above.
Okay.
So there's this big lie going around, which...
So everybody's lying to everybody, but the lies only work until dinner time, right?
Right.
And then you sit down at dinner and there's no food.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
A lot of times when you have a totalitarian state, so much of the attention and so much of the decision making is happening at a very narrow, high level, sometimes just with one person. And when it's not going well, there's a tendency historically to find someone to blame.
Yes.
Right? So Nero did that with the Christians, right? So that's where a lot of the Roman persecutions came out of. So is that maybe at the root of what someone has to be blamed when there's no food for dinner? Because it can't be the leaders, because they're right.
Right.
Is that kind of some of the underpinnings of what happened in the Cultural Revolution, or what were the leaders trying to accomplish?
I think at that point, China was still a new country, right? So it fears this kind of, or was still feared this kind of a threat from the Western world. They try to establish a new kind of ideology within the country, and everything outside the country, except for the Russians, were their enemies. But I think something happened in the 1950s when the Russians turned out to be some kind of enemy too, which I couldn't really understand.
No.
We need to talk to a historian about that. So at that point, China was in this kind of very tricky position politically in a global context.
Okay, so you've got all of this global stuff and national stuff going on, but that comes down to things like your family, right? And I think one of the most interesting parts of your story was how you and your family were shaped by, especially the activity of your grandfather. And then we'll ask a few more questions about him. But tell us about your family, and especially your grandfather, and how his engagement and action really shaped, in some ways, shaped your family and you.
Right. Maybe I can go backwards.
Okay.
Just from me first, and then my parents, their immediate family, and then my grandfather. As I said, I consider myself very lucky because I didn't really go through the Cultural Revolution. And by the time I went to first grade, it's already past Cultural Revolution.
Okay.
So it was really lucky for me to have this kind of a regular, which I call normal education. And when I went to the elementary school, people were rethinking about what education is, right? Especially my first elementary school teacher, she was a very loving person. And her philosophy about education is love.
Okay.
I mean, although she wasn't Christian, but she really loved her students. But because of that, she was punished and tortured during Cultural Revolution. So my upbringing with her, especially the first year when I went to school, I encountered this wonderful woman in her probably late 60s. She went through so much during the Cultural Revolution, but she still wants to bring love to her students. That was very, very touching.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm so lucky, because my first teacher was like that. So that planted a very beautiful seed in my heart. And I knew, I mean, back then when I was...
and a seed that she really opened the door then to you really loving learning, because you kept on doing it for a while.
Yes, maybe too long. I don't know. Life is learning all the way until the day we die.
Yeah.
So anyway,
and maybe beyond that.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yes.
The library, I've got a little library here in my office, but the library in heaven will be better.
Oh, yes. So I consider myself very, very lucky. I could, go through the college entry exams and go to college and even study abroad. I mean, I had obstacles here and there, but I had the opportunity that my parents never had. So their life were a little bit more dramatic than mine. They were born both before the New China, so they had the memories of the old China, and including the Japanese, the Japan invading China, because my dad, their whole family had to, escape from Nanjing to inland in order to avoid that massacre. But I think what the New China impacted them was their youth. Because at that point, especially, before Cultural Revolution, they were in college, right? But as I said, before the Cultural Revolution, there were a longer period of time when the country was reforming. And along with that, there was this kind of separation within people into different categories. So people... At the very beginning, when China was newly established, everyone was so proud.
All for one.
Yes, we are all equal. We're looking for this grand future. Everyone is equal. But at certain point, things turned. We're not equal anymore. And we're not equal not because what you did or are doing, but what kind of family you were from. So there were 5 red categories and 5 black categories, right? So the red categories, red means good, right?
Okay.
In China, sorry.
No, no,
it
yeah.
may mean alarming in a different culture, but a red means good in
Well,
China.
see, if we had school uniforms and our school was in China, they would be red. Here they're blue.
Right. So the 5 red categories, they are the military, the revolutionary leader, revolutionary martyr, the worker, the low-income farmer. So
Okay.
basically, they're this kind of a good family. If you were born from those families, you are great. Regardless of what you do, you're just great, right?
Uh-huh.
And then there's also this 5 black categories or class. There are landlords, high-income farmers, the anti-revolutionary, the bad, and the rightist. So unfortunately, both my parents were in the black category.
You were on the blacklist.
Right, exactly. So during their youth, during their upbringing, they had this kind of inborn kind of shame with them, so that they had to be super careful what they say, how they behave, and at certain times they have to, be very kind of smart in a way to avoid confrontation, right? But I think, they were not born like super rich people. My mom's parents, her father was just a small business owner. And my father's father, he was an educator. They were not like filthily rich or...
So how did they get on the blacklist then?
Because they were not the red. If you're not the red, you're the black, right? Especially for the common people. Maybe they make kind of exceptions for if you were upper level, like if you were guoming down some kind of a person, and then you say, oh, I love the new China, and then you may be exempt.
Okay,
right?
okay.
But since they were the younger, they're the lower class in a way, they were the black. So I don't know. Because right now both my parents are aging, and I start to see some kind of weaknesses in their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Partly is because they're aging, right? But as I try to think maybe there's something in their youth that they didn't have or have an opportunity, or that were kind of suppressed in a way to make them think or behave in this way.
Okay,
right?
okay.
So my grandfather, I think, my father and my grandfather, they're together, right? I think my grandfather's experience pre or during the Cultural Revolution really had a very negative impact on my father. If you could imagine, when my father was in his very early 20s.
So this is your grandfather, the educator?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. My grandfather, he was born from a farmer.
Okay.
If a Cultural Revolution was like 50 years earlier, he would be the red, right? But unfortunately, he took a different route. I really admire him, but I really don't have any kind of a visual memory about him.
So why can't you describe your grandfather to us visually?
Because I don't have any single photo of his. His photos were burnt during the Cultural Revolution.
And did people come in and take them away, or who burned them?
His wife,
Okay.
my grandmother. So it's all very sad.
Well, and she did that not because she did it not because she didn't love your grandfather. Why did she do it?
To protect the family.
Because
It's
if you
all-
treasured one picture of him, the whole family would be at risk.
Right. Because at one point he was determined to be the criminal, right? Just to give you a little bit background of he was born in a farmer's family. Both parents were illiterate, but I didn't really understand how he went to school, but eventually he went to the university in Nanjing, which we call as the Central University back then. He studied law and he made himself a lawyer. And he also...
So he's ambitious, hardworking, industrious?
I would believe so.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, he is. I just confirmed with my mom this morning. While he was doing his work as a lawyer, he also established a middle school back in the countryside where he came from.
So he was interested in helping others
Yes.
become educated.
Yes. To him, maybe education was the way to really lift China, lift the people.
Well, that would seem like the kind of person that you'd want to celebrate in a society, right?
Yes. But I guess maybe he didn't teach the right thing. I mean, not only in the countryside where he grew up, but also in Nanjing, he established another elementary school. So I just admire this man so much, but it's very sad. I don't know what he looked like. The really sad thing is
he was basically erased.
Yes. In a very kind of scary way. I can tell you this little moment that my mom kept on bringing up to me, because my dad just refused to talk about it, right? But my mom, in talking about, or like a wife complaining about the husband being weak, and my mom was
So that happens in China too?
right. It's across different cultures, right? No, but my mom was trying to help me understand where that weakness came from. It's that moment, right, when my grandfather was determined to be the bad person or even the criminal. I have no idea how to precisely describe that status.
Well, criminal as per the red.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Because
Yes.
most criminals are not founding like middle schools and things like that. That's not a criminal enterprise typically here in
Yes.
America anyway.
Right. So when he was determined the criminal, he was taken away from his family in Nanjing to send him back to the countryside. But it was a very kind of, I imagine if I was in my early 20s and my father was taken away from me, not only that, I was not allowed to say goodbye to him. I was only allowed to see him from far away. That's so traumatic. Can you imagine?
It's hard to even imagine something like that happening.
Yeah.
So when you say that your grandfather was a criminal, please explain. Was he? He's founding middle schools. He's going to law school. We wouldn't call any of those things criminal. Why were the people in the Cultural Revolution thinking of him as a criminal?
That's a very good question. I can only guess. I don't have the document. Maybe there's no document about the reasoning why.
Might not be.
Right? But just me thinking back, just piecing together what my mom has told me, maybe because he worked in the Kuomintang government.
Okay.
Right after, he was a lawyer, and I think he was in one of the probably equivalent to our Congress.
Okay.
In a way, he was trying to represent the people back then.
Right. And really during the Cultural Revolution, there's a lot of philosophical and political kind of tests that if you fail those tests, it's kind of like what Orwell talks about in 1984, like thought crime.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So he committed thought crime.
Or he worked for the wrong boss.
Right. So it's so interesting to me how thorough that erasure was, and how you still have recognized this is a very important person in your life, even though, and you like, how can that erasure be so complete? But when a family knows that everyone's going to suffer, they're the ones doing the erasing because
Yes.
they're threatened.
Yeah, my grandmother, she was a teacher also, and I understand how much she loved my grandfather and her family. And it's like there's no other way to protect her family besides doing this thing to erase her husband.
So how did you make it to America?
Oh, I mean, that's why I said I'm lucky. So I really grew up in this very lucky period. 1987, Deng Xiaoping, which was also announced as a criminal during the Cultural Revolution, he then somehow became one of the leaders after the Cultural Revolution. He started this open door policy for China, where China would welcome Western kind of industries and exchange, economic exchange in 1987.
Yeah, and
so,
I think you whipped up on us in ping pong and things like that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Is that
so.
Forrest Gump?
I believe that is in Forrest Gump.
Right. Was that 1972 Nixon visited China?
That's exactly right. That's when the door really opened.
Yeah. But really, the economic opening was 1987.
Okay.
That I was still in high school back then. But then I went through schooling, and China was opening up more and more. And our professors, they would come back and show us those slides of what the Manhattan looks like, or what Europe looks like. A funny thing was they made us believe all American cities are in a grid, like Manhattan. So,
welcome to Lancaster.
I know. So out of curiosity, I just felt like I really need to see the world because my parents didn't have the chance, and so that made me come here. I went to Georgia Tech to do my PhD studies. I met a wonderful group of professors, and not all of them are from the United States. That's really wonderful because they bring in their own ways of thinking, their perspectives, very, very, encouraging and uplifting memories.
Well, and kind of invigorating, right? Because you're as someone who's learning, it's so wonderful to have people that are looking at something differently.
Yeah.
Having those different perspectives is something that in an academic setting is just a wonderful thing to have. So
that's a must.
Yeah.
That's what education should be.
So then you went from Georgia Tech then to, it's A&M where you've taught most of the time?
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why my trajectory of life is super simple.
Yeah. Well, so talk about lucky. Seems lucky for a while here. So you got out of China. You were born right after the Cultural Revolution, kind of you're in the wake of it in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And you land in the American university system.
Right.
What do you see? What characteristics of the Cultural Revolution do you see happening in American schools now?
Yeah, well, here is an interesting kind of observation. When I first landed in Georgia Tech, right, as a foreign student, I was struggling with my language. I wasn't able to,
Well, and they have an accent down there, so
No. Maybe I can blame on the accent.
Yeah,
right?
you blame it on the Georgians.
But really, the funny thing is, honestly, I could only understand probably 50-60% of what my professors were talking, right?
Now, students, listen to that. She only understood 50 to 60% and she got a PhD.
No, the problem is, even worse, is I could only express. Because we had seminars, right? You have to listen to the professor talking, and then you had to, discuss. I could only voice 50% of what I was thinking. So what's that 50% times 50%, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, maybe benefited from this kind of numbness to kind of ideology in the university. What I experienced was this very kind of diverse thinking, very dynamic.
Well, in some ways, you're in architecture, and that's a little bit more shielded than places like the humanities or something like that.
I think so.
Because buildings have to stand up, right? They can't.
Right.
They're not built on politics.
That's correct. Right. That's correct. But gradually, I think I'm getting started a little more kind of sensitive to the ideology going around, and how people can think or say around the colleagues or around the students, right? So I think there are two observations that I can make now. Maybe they're kind of biased. I guess we're all biased anyway. One is the openness for debating.
Okay.
Especially ideology related, right? I mean, I'm not a humanity professor, so I couldn't really speak for them. Maybe, I'm just thinking about my husband, because he's comparative literature, and whenever I say something quasi-philosophical, I start to get kind of cautious. Anyway.
Be gentle, Brian. Be gentle.
So anyway, the ideology, right? My understanding as a kind of a lay person of an ideology is our understanding of the world, of the society, and our ideal society, how it could be run, right? Mm-hmm. If that is the case, we should allow different opinions, because we're not thinking exactly the same.
Well, not thinking exactly the same, and certainly not thinking one person is not thinking exactly correctly. Now, that doesn't mean you think you're incorrect, because if I thought I was incorrect, I would change my mind.
Right, right.
But it's that rub against other minds,
yes,
and other perspectives that really blesses you with the aha moments of when you say, I have been seen, or there is another way to look at this question or to find this solution. But that's stopping in American universities.
Yes. I think the problem is also the ideology comes first. So is certain ideology is considered correct and certain is considered wrong. So there's no way you should think, what if, or can we look at it from a different perspective, right? That to me is detrimental to education in any subject.
It's kind of the end of education, isn't it? In some senses.
Yes.
So as you look at society, American society more broadly, what concerns do you have that some of the forces that might have been active in the Cultural Revolution are fomenting under the here in this place that is so different, but yet maybe threatened by those same kinds of forces?
We can speculate where the forces come from, right? Because that has been my question, what made it happen? But there is one thing, just one phenomenon we can digest or analyze where it came from, is the news or the media. I would never imagine in the United States the news anchors would talk so much the same. And they even use the same words, same phrases.
So sometimes I see that where they'll put clips back to back online.
Right.
And they say the same words, which is at least weird, right?
Yes. It's almost like someone, I don't think it really happened, but it just seems to me someone handed them a script, right? And then they have to use the keywords in a certain way. To me, that's the same thing as not allowing diverse perspective in a university. And here, we're not allowing diverse perspectives of an event. We're prohibiting investigations, right?
Yeah.
Because one object in front of you, from different perspective, you would understand it differently. And if we don't allow that perspective or that voice or that narrative, it's detrimental to the society.
Yeah. So if, in thinking back about American history, there have always been political differences in American history. But typically, and Americans like to think of themselves as uncompromising, but one of the great strengths of America, and it can be a strength of democracy, is that the people learn how to compromise. Mm-hmm. They listen to another person's perspective, and there's a give and take.
Yes.
Which keeps you from extremes, right? When you're listening to someone that disagrees with you, and when you have to get, in some ways, their cooperation to get a majority or a large number of people behind things. That's a really good insight.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on that. I mean, even in my teaching architecture, right? The first class, when I teach my students, I would always remind them, you only learn one perspective in my class. Because there are, even in architecture, you have so much differences, right? You have so many different perspectives, so many different approaches or theoretical frameworks or design methods. I mean, you cannot say I'm the only one who is doing architecture and everything else is not architecture, right?
Well, I think the Bauhaus architects said that at one point. And,
They did?
Yeah. And sometimes Frank Lloyd Wright sounds like he's the only one doing architecture, but you're obviously right. And it's obvious that rub of perspectives is what goads learning on. It moves it forward. So when you think about training kids, when you think about, you're interested, of course you're interested in children. Ethan's a fourth grader this year, I guess, third grader. But you're also interested in people being prepared to go off to university because they'll be your students and then be taught by the faculty there and then go off and be architects throughout the country. So when you're thinking about training up children, what are some of the characteristics or what are some of the things that you would recommend or see as essential?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I've been thinking about it because I have a child and I'm teaching foundation year, right? So every year I receive this new group of young students who are full of dreams about architecture. But there's one thing that just hurts me again is they were very timid. They were trained to listen to you. They ask you, is this wrong or is this right? And I was like, gosh, you're designing. There's no design that is wrong unless it's collapsing, right? Just tell me what you want and I'll help you to reach your goal.
So something in our society is training them to be timid.
Not only that, I think our education is trying to produce a mass instead of individuals.
Oh, that's so good. I have a friend at church and I was talking to him about Christian education and he said, I'm not a big fan of Christian education. This was probably 15 years ago. And I said, why? And he said, because Christian education typically just makes compliant people. And I was like, he's right. He's right. And we're at a time in history now where making compliant people is a very dangerous thing.
It is. I mean, if you think about people during the Cultural Revolution, right? I still believe a majority of people are kind, are good people.
Mm-hmm.
But
like
why,
your teacher.
Yes. But why is it the whole country turned mad? Why is it everyone is turning against everyone else? I mean, the best thing that they can do, according to my parents, which I think they're truly good people, is not to turn on other people. Mm-hmm. But why is it they didn't stand up? So because, they were trained to be this kind of compliant.
A compliant mass.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was just recently interacting with another Veritas parent who you're going to miss because they're coming back to the school from missions work in China.
Oh.
So they will have at least maybe one or two kids here for a semester while they're raising funds and heading back to China. And we were gathering around him, welcoming him back, and he said, everything that you hear about China is propaganda. Like, none of it's true. So you were born into a time where people had been trained to be timid, and everything around you had to be a lot of propaganda. And we want to prepare our students here to not become timid, to not become wrongly compliant. There's a good kind of compliance. When your mom or dad asks you to do something, we still think you should comply.
Of course.
But when someone tries to terrify you away from debate or a search for the truth, you should not comply. What was key to you being able to find your way through that propaganda and not be intimidated by it or made timid by it?
Well, honestly, I think I'm still intimidated.
Well, you seem really you seem really timid.
Yes, of course. Let me think how to answer this question. A few thoughts came to my mind. Right, you have to talk about the facts. Right, the problem is not the problem is the emotion. So when you get yourself worked up, then you are not really discussing anything, right?
So there's a value that American culture seems to be losing, and it's a value for big T truth, which is something that is true, not just for me. It's not a true statement about my desires or a true statement about what I like. Mm-hmm. It's something that is true for everyone at every point, all the time throughout history.
Yes.
Those things are so precious. And now I was recently watching something, and every time the person who was doing the interviewing tried to ask about big T truth, people accused him of being menacing and hateful and oppressive. And I'm like, all he's talking about is big T truth. And you know what? That's not an easy thing to find. And it's not something that we need other people to help us find it. But that means we have to talk about it.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, the internet is a mixture of a lot of information where discussions, right? You oftentimes hear people talking about, accusing someone, he said that because he dislikes that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And, well, whether you like it or not, that doesn't make any difference. Yeah. It's really the truth that we're seeking.
You know, we're kind of it, and I'm not a conspiracy guy. But I do read books. And, you get 1984, you get Orwell's vision of the future, which is dystopic. Mm-hmm. And then you get Aldous Huxley's vision of the future, which is dystopic in another way. And it seems that we get I'm worried about parts of both of those right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you've got the cancel culture that seems like the erasing culture of the Cultural Revolution in China. And then you've got this flood of information so that you can't, it's so hard, the Huxleyan view, it's so hard to find any truth that you just throw up your hands and give up.
Yeah, especially, the AI, ChatGPT, and it's kind of scary because I saw a video how a person talking can be manipulated. Yes. Right? Even with your own face, almost like your mouth is moving in a way that you're saying something you didn't say.
Well, and I noticed I was watching a television show on Netflix, and I realized it was an Israeli show that they weren't speaking in another language. They were speaking English, but really it was just everything's been massaged just a little bit. And it's still a little imperfect, but getting closer and closer. To me, it took me a while to even realize it was happening.
Yes.
So how do you see China's future?
Well, honestly, this may not be a popular kind of comment.
Are you going to get timid on me here?
No. I think China is going to boom, is going to keep on becoming stronger and stronger. Okay. It comes from a very kind of a specific system, how the country is run, right? I mean, China is a huge country with a lot of people. So, which means the labor would be cheap there. So they have that foundation to develop their own economy if the whole world somehow boycotts them, right? And also the new leadership, they are smart enough to understand how critical economy is to a country.
Yeah.
Plus, they are making their people, I think in a more smart way than the Cultural Revolution, right? The Cultural Revolution was the pure madness, but now they try to stimulate this patriotism.
Okay. So it's like, at the end of 1984, Winston learns to love Big Brother, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what you're seeing is, and I in interacting with folks from China who are usually just wonderful people, they are very patriotic.
Yes.
They are very, and I'm like, oh, it seems kind of rough, bad. And they're like, no,
Right.
China
right.
is good.
Right. I mean, there's some kind of differentiation I want to make, right? So they are proud to be Chinese. I think probably they're very proud for the culture,
Yeah.
for the people.
When so there's there's this disagreement at the highest philosophical level between a democracy and an autocracy or a tyranny, but the people down underneath, there's usually a lot of similarities.
Yes.
And I think that there are characteristics of Chinese people, at least the ones that I haven't met all of the Chinese people. That would be really challenging. But the ones that I've met they're open and they enjoy life, and they usually have a pretty good sense of humor. And we've been blessed to have a number of students from China, some that have been adopted into American families, some that have traveled from China to come over here. And it's just been such a blessing to get to interact with their families and get to know them better.
Yeah.
I think you're wrong about China. I think I think demographically, I don't know how they're going to come out of the demographic free fall that they're going to go into population-wise. David Bonson, who was on season 2, we weren't talking about China. He and I were talking offline. And he said their population will be cut in half in 50 years.
Yes. Yes, I'm aware of that.
Now that's still 700 million people, right? But that's minus 700 million. And I just heard from my missionary friend. He's like, I think we have 4 billion houses in China now. They just keep building houses even though there's no one to live in them.
Right.
So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. We'll have another podcast maybe in 20 years.
Sure. Yes. We'll see what happens.
Let's schedule that.
But there's one thing, I mean, talking about patriotism, there's one thing I've felt originally very kind of inspired, but now kind of concerned about the U.S. Is almost like talking about or even showing the love for this country, the United States, becomes negative. Why is that?
Well, I mean, you're from China. I mean, don't you see how horrible a place this is?
I don't know.
Well, it always seems so kind of, I don't know. It's hard for me to take something that seems, there's so much counterfactuals, right? Like, if this is such a terrible place, why are people like risking their lives to sneak into it all the time?
Right.
Like
right.
If this is such a terrible place, why can I go to like 80 grocery stores where for me, I'm much more likely to be buried in a, as the things collapse as I'm trying to pull a box of cereal out
right.
rather than to starve to death, which has been the normal condition of humanity. So I blame the universities. I think that this is a crucial moment in American history because the universities and the K-12 schools are teaching Americans to hate America for untrue reasons. Every country has plenty to be, wish that they could have done differently. I mean, on the last week of school, I heard Martin Luther King Jr. in the hallway, and Mr. Etter was down in the Inkling Lounge, and they were watching the I Have a Dream speech. And Martin Luther King Jr. says that the Declaration of Independence was given to African Americans, and it was a bad check. It was a check that had insufficient funds, he says. So the Declaration said all men are created equal, but what he was saying was, and you're not treating us as equals, right? So America had a vision, and it wasn't fulfilling that vision. That's something to be sorry about and to work to change. Mm-hmm. But what's happening now is not the recognition that those foundational commitments in America, the commitment to individual liberty, the commitment to a market economy where it's not a bad thing for you to be ambitious and to try to produce things, that commitment to a religious freedom and a level of religious tolerance that allows for people to, instead of fight each other, to try to persuade each other. Right? When people are being taught that all of those things are bad, I just want to I want to throw my hands up, because it's not that you're saying, like Martin Luther King Jr. said, America says this, but it does this. That's a cogent criticism. Mm-hmm. When you're just lying, but you're lying to people who don't know enough to defend themselves against you, or who have been cowed and intimidated. That makes my blood boil a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of this throwing away the four olds in the Cultural Revolution, right? So the four olds means the old culture, the old ideology, the old customs, the old traditions. So at the very beginning, you might think, it makes sense to say we're having a new start and the old things are bad, but to what extent? So if you move too extremely, like what people did during Cultural Revolution by, pulling down, destroying the temples and burning all those books and just saying, hey, we start from a new ground, but there's new ground to build upon. That's self-denying. You're denying yourself,
sure.
Right? You're throwing away your own culture,
right?
Which left what after the Cultural Revolution, which left people with nothing.
Yeah.
They don't even know how to behave in a polite way. I mean, my husband and I sometimes had this disagreement, right? He was like,
because he's American. He's a Texan, right?
He is Georgian.
Georgian. Yes. Oh no. Oh no, those Georgians.
So anyway, he was like, those people are so rude. I was like, Brian, please, they were not taught how to be polite.
Yeah. But when you have a revolution, you wipe away everything.
Yes.
And no one knows anything anymore.
The erasure.
Right.
Of everything.
So that fellow up on the wall there is a guy named Edmund Burke. And Edmund Burke, he's one of my heroes. He was a Whig politician in Great Britain. And I'm restarting the Whig Party because I'm frustrated with the current political parties. The Whig mantra, or our mission statement, is do nothing. We want a government that does not accomplish anything. Just leave things alone. Give people as much freedom as you can. Only do something if it's the direst point. So if we've got people that want to learn more about the Cultural Revolution, we're gonna attach a video link and a PowerPoint that Dr. He put together. But are there some other resources that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I would really wish that I could find this memoir by a professor of my parents. His name is Lawrence Liu, and his Chinese name is Liu Guanghua. He wrote a memoir about the Cultural Revolution, and I don't mind telling you this, when I was reading it, I was crying. It was very firsthand and a lot of details, a lot of true emotions. It's called Under The Scorching Sun. And he wrote it in English, but I couldn't find the English version for some reason. And I only read his Chinese
Hopefully
translation.
not erased. Hopefully not erased.
Hopefully, yeah. He was a very, very wonderful person. He grew up in China. He was from the black family.
But that thing you talked about, the blacklist.
Yeah, the blacklist.
The red were good. The black were bad.
Yes,
okay.
yes. But he was from a much wealthier family, so he had the chance to study architecture at Columbia University, and he was such an ambitious man and loving the country, China. So after he got his master's degree, he went back to China to practice architecture.
Okay.
And then he was also teaching at the university I went to, and my parents both went to Southeast University. Back then it was called Central University. He became a professor there while having the practice, right? Very loving man, very talented. He played a very good piano.
Oh, really?
Yes. You in the PowerPoint you will see his photos, right? But you will see this dramatic change of his photos when he was young, very hopeful, and the photos when and after the Cultural Revolution, because during that period he was tortured, not because of what he did, but just because he had the education in the United States. So that's why, compared to him, I think my parents were lucky because they were not physically tortured, although my dad was sent to the re-education camp, but he was not physically tortured. And this guy was. And if you read the quotes that I wrote down in the PowerPoint, there were details how he and his other, friends or colleagues were tortured, how the torture came out of no reason, and how there were no law to abide by, meaning you could, in one of the details that he described, one person was found dead on campus, and his socks were white. And the red guards, which were the good people torturing them, said, oh, the guy just turned crazy running around on campus. And this Lawrence Liu, he was thinking differently. So if he was running around, how could his socks were red, right? So details like that is a complete horror. So he went through that torture. During that period, the Red Guards were also trying to convince his wife to turn against him. But he has a very wonderful wife. She didn't. And it was very touching. It just really, warms people's heart when you see the moments when the love between the people really worked against the harsh environment.
Well, and maybe that's a key to, sometimes you feel, and there's a battle going on in this culture right now, but the weapons to win that battle are not guns and cannons, and it's really love. Yes. Right? And joy. Yes. And faith and care for each other. That is the thing that knocks down walls in this battle.
Yes.
So
yes. I don't think I included that quote in the PowerPoint, but he did write in his memoir about, it's the ending of the memoir, and sounded like he made terms to the experience, but he still felt the pain because he was physical pain and emotional too, because he was tortured. He was wounded and injured through the torture. But in the end, he described this scenery of the sunset where he saw his wife.
He was able to see that love and beauty and kindness that makes the pain not go away, but it says that there's more than that.
Yes, and he specifically said, thanks to God that brought him to this peace. And he also wishes his people in China having that joy.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Weiling He, we are so thankful. I'm so thankful to have had a year with you. And I hope that I know that sabbaticals only come like every 7th year.
Yes.
But we hope that you get a sabbatical like every year so you can be here where it's cooler and where you can be a part of Veritas. But we hope you take a little part of Veritas with you. And, I'll be praying for you that that a classical Christian school comes together there in College Station for you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Fischer.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to learn more about Veritas, visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.